Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, we have our usual roundup of the main stories affecting the Sikh community around the world. And as the new Indian High Commissioner appears in his first interview on Canadian TV, the backlash begins at his brazen whitewash of India's misbehaviour towards the Sikh community. And if there was any doubt over Carney's cowardice towards India, the new High Commissioner makes very clear who's spanking whom in this new relationship. Well, all this and more on today's show. But joining me, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our viewers out there. Thanks again for tuning in. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. Don't forget also to invite your friends and family. Our numbers have been kind of low lately, and it's probably because of certain shows get shadow banned more than others. So yeah, you by sharing, liking, all of that, including commenting, just put what city you're from or a good morning. Anything so basic even really does help us in the algorithm. So we appreciate it because you are as much as important to the show as we are. As a matter of fact, you're more important as a viewer because without you, we wouldn't be sitting here. So thank you very much for watching and see what happens at the end of the show if your comment makes it onto the screen. Back to you, Angus.
Indeed, and James and I together will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world, and indeed at the end of the show we will take a look at loads of great comments which have been filling up below the video, so thank you as always to our loyal audience for those. Right, James, let's get underway. What are you going to start us off with this morning?
Well, I thought we would take a quick peek at the Canadian Constitution and specifically the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the reason I thought this was important because as we see India moving forward trying to pressure Canada into taking actions against khalistan activists, as they're so-called, I call them, campaigners myself because they're campaigning for something positive. But I thought it was important to take a look at a few points in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as to why India will have a real problem trying to stifle that support for khalistan here in Canada. No matter what they do in terms of the political end and trying to push the Canadian government to deal with it and such as they describe it, we're not going to because we enjoy freedoms. Now, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is not actually that old. It was brought into law or enshrined in the Constitution actually in 1982. So it's been, my lifetime. I was barely 11 years old about that time. But it guarantees the political, the legal, and the equity rights of all people in Canada, from citizens to newcomers. It doesn't matter who you are, these rights apply to you. It serves as a powerful tool to protect individuals from infringement at all levels of government and their agencies. So again, that has a direct impact on the ability of India to try to persuade Canada to make any changes that way. Now, the Charter is divided into several sections, and each protecting different categories. Now, we have the fundamental freedoms, which are the freedom of conscience and the freedom of religion. So you can hold your own beliefs and you can have your own religious practice, whatever it is. And you are free to believe, you're free to practice, and you're free to be yourself. Now, the freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, similar, but we're talking in a wider scope here, and that's the freedom of the press and other media communications, in addition to just your thoughts and your beliefs. Happy Diwali to everybody. You can hear fireworks in the background. Some of my neighbors are celebrating, so if you hear some banging, it's not people who threaten me online taking action, it's just the fireworks. But again, freedom of peaceful assembly, and that's the right to gather in groups for a common purpose. Exactly what we see with the khalistan movement and people protesting or at least trying to raise public awareness of the khalistan struggle and why it is so important that the Sikh community be able to have this referendum. And again, that is a part of the peaceful assembly as well as the freedom of association. And you can be free to form any group that you want, such as unions, political parties, support and lobbying groups, all of that. So you can do that without persecution and without any ramifications, unless, of course, it's a hate group. But that's a whole, obvious one in itself. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. Now, the rights, obviously, here in Canada, they help to ensure that we remain a democracy, and the right to vote is in there, of course, the federal and provincial elections and every other level of elections in Canada, and the requirement that Parliament and the provincial legislatures must sit once every 12 months. And it feels sometimes that they might sit just once every 12 months. And even then, they don't get anything accomplished at times. But you also have the mobility rights. So you can remain in Canada, you can leave Canada if you are a citizen or resident and all of that. And you can move to and take up residence anywhere in the country, in any province that you choose, and you can work in any province that you choose. So if you are in Canada on a work visa that's open that allows you to change jobs, then you are also free to move from province to province. So you don't have to make those changes if it is in your open work visa. So don't just think because you've got a work visa you can just travel anywhere. There are certain levels and certain restrictions on some, so just be aware of that. But again, the legal rights are Section 7 of 14, which are rights designed to ensure procedural fairness in the justice system. So again, this is important because of the fact that we see India all the time trying to pressure the Canadian government to send people that are terrorists on their lists in India that are only guilty of free speech. And again, so that is protected here. And you've got the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. So Canada takes that very seriously, as well as the unreasonable, to be secure against any unreasonable search or seizures. So they can't go into your home and start looking for, things that you've sketched about Modi, with him and his date or whatever, right? The goats and whatnot. But in Section 9, the right to be not arbitrarily detained or imprisoned. And we see that that is something that is not practiced in India. Take the case of Jaggi. He is very clearly, he's been arbitrarily detained and imprisoned, and that's something that you wouldn't have in Canada. Is it perfect? Is it a perfect system? No. There have been people who have been detained and imprisoned that were wrongfully convicted, but they were given the due process of law. And sometimes errors are made or evidence and whatnot. We can get into a whole can of worms there. But again, it's not a perfect system, but it works. And it has worked for Canada on the premises. Now, in terms of the rights upon being charged with an offense, well, again, you've got the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty and the right to a trial within a reasonable time. Again, things that we talk about when it comes to the delays. Again, we can refer to Jaggi and how the India government is dragging this process out, delay after delay after delay, in order to keep him confined, when we all know that those charges should be stayed or just dismissed entirely and he should be released. But we will get into that another time. And then, of course, not to be subjected to any cruel and unusual punishment or treatment. Again, no torture, unlike the jails in India where they do have torture rooms. They've got torture cells there. So again, it shows the differences between the two. And I just thought it was important to bring that up because it really shows no matter how much India is trying to influence the Canadian government, and even if they get a permanent seat in the United Nations, as we were talking about last week, these are ways in which the Canadian government and our parliament can reach out and protect from arbitrary orders that India introduces within the United Nations. And we'll get into that later if it becomes an issue of them getting closer to that realization of a permanent seat. So we'll leave that one for today. But in any event, the only real changes that can be made is that these are not concrete. There are what they call the reasonable limits clauses, and that allows the government to pass laws that may limit charter rights, but only if these limits can show reasonable and justified in a free and democratic society. So that's where, as I mentioned earlier, I'd come back to, and that would be like hate crimes or racially motivated crimes that go beyond, just anything, essentially. So yeah, it is a matter of balancing free speech against hate speech and making sure that the definition is there. And that would be a clear example of the reasonable limits clause in Section 1. Now, of course, you can look at the notwithstanding clause, which is the Section 33, and that allows the government, federal or provincial, to limit certain charter rights for a period of up to a maximum of 5 years. And to do that, they must explicitly declare that a law is operating as notwithstanding. the charter. So again, that clause is used very rarely, and one of the only times that I can really clearly remember it being used was during the pandemic. So again, it was about using it to try to limit interaction, wear masks, and for public health, and saving lives. And that's pretty much the only time. And of course, there was the tie-in with the trucker convoy, but I won't get into those whiny little people. In any event, though, the Charter has had a huge impact on Canadians. It protects our rights. It protects all of us, and we appreciate that. Again, a deeper report on that is available on our Substack. Same with the other stories that we're briefing tonight. I'm going to speed up a little bit because I am going a bit late here, so we'll just move it along here. Now, over in Dublin, Ireland, there are violent attacks against the Indian diaspora that have sent shockwaves through the community, not just in Dublin, but across Ireland. This has been something that we've seen since last summer, and it's still going on. It has been a very, very tumultuous time and very threatening for a lot of the Indian diaspora. There have been cases where a chef was on his way to a high-end hotel where he worked, and I believe he was on a scooter or his bicycle, but in any event, he was attacked on his way to work. He was robbed and suffered severe head injuries and trauma from that. There have been people that have been shouting all kinds of obscene words and abuse and threats towards people of the Indian diaspora, as well as other people who have been, such as this person here, an IT professional, who is asked to remain anonymous.
Oh, James, if we can jump in
but
there.
But
if
he
you can,
used to feel that it was one of the safest countries in the world. And now his wife and he are hesitant to go out after dark. They are afraid for their safety. Now, there have been many different concerns brought up and many ways that it could be helped to reduce this crime and to reduce the hate that's going on. And different organizations are responding to the Irish police and saying, here's what we can do. And some of it is hate crime designations, increased police presence, government condemnation. So these different things that you see in other countries that do have an effect on bringing down some of the rhetoric and some of the hate. So again, very, very important to deal with. And it's still going on, though, months later. And it has been really, really uncomfortable for a lot of people. And now they're considering, moving out of Dublin and out of the areas. But again, they are there and have built a life. So it's not fair to really punish them for the actions of others. And that's where law enforcement and government need to step in. Now, just Tuesday evening, last night, 6 people were arrested following a violent protest outside of the City West Hotel in Saggart, southwest Dublin, which is being used to house asylum seekers. This is a little different than the other reports, though, because this actually had what I call an incendiary event or an explosive event that drew 2,000 people to gather outside of this facility to protest. And it significantly escalated, and it turned into a violent protest. People were hurling bricks. They set police vehicle on fire, and the police had to break out the riot gear, the mounted units, and a water cannon deployed to manage the scene and disperse that crowd. Now, this one is a bit different. However, they are, again, targeting a whole group of people for the actions of one Sikh scumbag that assaulted a 10-year-old girl. And that happened earlier this week. So you can understand where the anger is, but they're directing it at a whole group of people instead of just the individual who acted out in that disgusting, sick, depraved way. Now, the 26-year-old man reportedly was an asylum seeker and has been charged in connection to that event, but the community was still very angry and they were looking for somewhere to take that anger out. No doubtedly, there were certain instigators that brought the violence and really incited the violence there at that event. And of course, Justin Kelly, he is the Garda commissioner, condemned the violence, describing it as thuggery and a mob intent on violence against the police. The Prime Minister and the Justice Minister also issued statements, And they said that attacks on police will not be tolerated. What bothered me about that is that they didn't mention anything about calling out racial violence in the town, or sorry, in the city or in the country. And I think that that was very important, or it could have just been, sent out in a different context that didn't make it to the mainstream releases that were sent out. Again, I just think that it was an opportunity to also address that as opposed to just the attacks on the police, which are, don't get me wrong, very important to deal with as well. But I'm just saying there is, a time, and that would have been it to try to defuse the situation. Now, back here in Canada, Peel Regional Police have dismantled a significant mail theft ring, and that has led to the arrest of 8 individuals of Indian origin. The importance of this is why we bring it up is because they do target certain regions. And why do they target? Well, they target for identity theft. They go for credit cards. They go for bank statements. They go for any personal identification or identifiers. With that, they can sometimes actually convince bank reps on the phone to give them access to accounts. Or right now, as we've seen with the extortion situation going across Canada, they can have access to your bank account statements if you're still getting them mailed out. Most of us access them on the internet or through our phones, through the app, or have them emailed to us. But again, if you are having them mailed to you, you've got to make sure that you are checking your mail regularly. I don't know what it's like in the UK, Angus, but a lot of Canada has switched to community post boxes. So I go down to the corner, there's a big thing there, it's got all the different mailboxes, I've got my key, I take my mail out. So what's happened in this case is they somehow got a master key to the mailboxes, either the outgoing or these community boxes, and they are able to access that through a master key that either could have been stolen or duplicated, or many different ways they can get it. But again, it's so important for people to remember that if you are picking up your mail from a community box, that you do it. If you have an outside mailbox, make sure that you grab your mail on a daily basis so that it reduces the likelihood of you being victimized. The other big concern is that, of course, a lot of this is organized by different individuals. And I forgot to switch my stories on the screen there. My apologies, folks. That was my fault. I forgot to switch them over. But in any event, so as I was saying, they have this big concern of the mail theft. And it is a lot of times the big organized crime nexus that is dealing with it. Now, the people on the low end of the gangs are the ones that are sent out to actually steal the mail because it's a high-risk activity. So therefore, it takes the higher-ups out of the equation and less ties to the actual crime from them. Now, the lower ring people will get a certain percentage of the money that, or whatever they can get back from this. And again, the identity theft, the check fraud, the bank account takeovers, all of this stuff, but also the personal information. They can use it to target their victims. As I said, with the extortion going on, they know how much people have available in their accounts with statements. But it is a very big problem. This particular case alone, where the police had gotten reports from individuals in the community of missing mail and issues such as that, they actually started an investigation, and they found that they were in possession of over 400,000 Canadian dollars worth of opportunity there, whether that was credit cards, checks, and all of that. Now, if you have a corporate check sent to you, or a check of any sort, what they do is they bleach out or get rid of the actual amounts on the checks, and then they increase that amount by whatever, they exponentially in some cases, and then they have one of the low-level people go and cash it as they do, and then again, that money's divvied up. So again, it shows how lucrative that this can be for the gangs and the individuals involved. Now, as we finish up our report from around the globe here, let's take a look at a family in Punjab who is trying to repatriate their son, Sandeep Sani, who died unexpectedly in Italy. The family is still trying to appeal to the Indian government for the assistance in repatriating his body and having it brought back for the last rites. This is a situation that, of course, can be very difficult, especially for families on limited budgets. Now, saying he had traveled to Italy on a tourist visa, visiting his sister who resides there. And the visit, which was meant to be a joyous family reunion, turned into a tragedy when Sandeep passed away unexpectedly. The exact circumstances and causes of his sudden death are not yet known. So at this point, we have to wait and see what's going on. They may have an autopsy or depending on that. But again, they may know the causes and just have not released it as of yet. The grieving family, of course, is facing the complex and emotional draining process of bringing the body back to India. They've reportedly reached out to government officials, including the Ministry of External Affairs, and local political representatives to intervene on their behalf. They were quoted, one of the family members, that is, as saying, "We just want to see our son one last time and perform his last rites here in our homeland." Family spokesman had further stated that we urge the government to help us in this dark hour. So the hurdle of repatriating a body from a foreign country is significant logistically and financially. And many families, it is about navigating the bureaucracy. You've got to receive the death certificate from Italian authorities. You've got to obtain clearances from the local police, coordinate with the Indian embassy in Rome, and then there's the high costs, the expenses not only for the mortuary services, the embalming, the specialized casket, and air cargo fees can be prohibitively expensive, often running into thousands of euros. Now, there's also the language and legal barriers. The family has to navigate a foreign legal system and all of that documentation in a language that they often do not speak. So in such cases, that's where the Indian government, through its embassies and the Ministry of External Affairs, can play a crucial role. While the government does not typically cover the full cost, it can help expedite paperwork, provide a list of verified service providers, and coordinate with the local authorities to ensure the process is completed smoothly and respectfully. Now, the Saini family remains hopeful that their appeal will be heard and that the government intervention can swiftly clear the hurdles, allowing them to bring their son home for that final farewell. And I just thought that was important because we do see a lot of that, Angus, where, it may be a heart attack, it may be, non-criminal, but it is something that people should consider. And whether you get travel insurance, again, I don't know what that's like for people in India who are traveling abroad, if that's, even possible from the realistic point of view for most. So again, it is a sad state, but hopefully they will have some success in repatriating this young man's body back to India, Angus.
Yes, obviously a very sad story. Unfortunately, yes, deaths overseas. Many years ago I had to go through the same process to repatriate a relative who died overseas. It's a horrible, horrible, painful process, but there is fortunately a very tried and tested and well trodden route through international protocols to ensure that these things do happen as quickly and as smoothly as possible. But it's thoughts of the family as always. I want to talk about particularly though the story about Ireland, because this does touch on something that we talked a lot about. And this is the violence against minority communities. And unfortunately, minority communities, actually, not just in Ireland, but of course here in the United Kingdom as well, we talked about, and it does happen, we know, in North America and across Europe as well, is that minority communities are facing this backlash against anger about immigration. And again, I did a long piece a few days ago about the root causes of the rise of this social anger that is appearing now on our streets. And it basically is down once again down to the root causes, uncontrolled immigration, is that we are pouring too many people from overseas into our societies. And this is what is driving people to anger. And unfortunately, as I've said, of course, we've always had the racist idiots on the extremes, but it is now pushing ordinary people into anger, which in turn manifests itself into racist and hate attacks, hate crimes. And one aspect that I haven't really talked about that actually this story in Ireland really touches upon, and this is one of the critical issues of this, is that with this uncontrolled immigration, and particularly the illegal immigration, and particularly here in the UK and to Ireland to some degree, is that many of those who are coming across illegally are, of course, throwing away their passports. They're throwing away any identity papers, which means they can hide their identity. Now, many of these individuals, we don't have statistics, and I certainly don't have them to hand, but many of these individuals are the world's criminal detritus. They are people exploiting this system, this illegal trafficking system, to flee their home countries because they are criminals. Many of them are sexual predators. And we have seen on an almost daily basis here in the UK, and we've seen it in Sweden, we've seen it in Germany, two other countries that have suffered extraordinary degrees of illegal and legal immigration. We have seen a huge increase in sex crimes, sex assaults, rapes against women, against our daughters, our wives, etc., here in our countries. And many of these attacks have been perpetrated by these so-called asylum seekers. Now, many of these are not asylum seekers. They are literally criminals fleeing their home countries who are already wanted in their home countries for similar crimes. They come over to our countries and they have now been seen to attack our women. We have several cases, just even this week, of illegal immigrants who are now housed in our hotels who've gone out and sexually assaulted young girls and women. And unfortunately, this has happened in Ireland, and this has happened several times in Ireland. And we've seen actually huge riots in Ireland as a result of this. And now we're seeing increasing riots here in the UK as well for this very reason. I mean, frankly, we're all human beings. If we see a young girl in one of our towns or cities raped by a so-called asylum seeker, what are you going to do? Of course you're going to be angry about it. So, unfortunately, it is understandable. The sad point, though, the sad side effect of all this is that these angry people, who are justifiably angry, are looking for targets for their hate. Now, of course, we have it here in the UK. They protest outside these very hotels that these so-called asylum seekers are being housed in. But unfortunately, they also take it out on anybody they find in their paths, particularly the young testosterone-fueled men who are angry. They're looking for targets. So they walk down the street, they see a Sikh with a turban on. It's one of them, isn't it? That's their attitude. And unfortunately, this is the mentality that is being driven all the way back through the single root cause. And this is why I keep saying these are just symptoms. These are terrible, tragic symptoms. But we've got to address the root cause, which is this immigration, this uncontrolled immigration, both legal and illegal, and particularly the illegal immigration, because through the illegal immigration, it's scumbags like this that are exploiting the system. They're also spoiling it for genuine, legitimate asylum seekers who, actually, we have no problem with. If you are seeking refuge from a war zone, certainly here in the UK, we'll help you. We let you in and we take care of you. But unfortunately, there are those who are exploiting this system, and they are ruining it not just for the legitimate asylum seekers, they're ruining it for the rest of society. Because, of course, the backlash, as we're seeing, it ruins it for the existing minorities in our society because they're facing the backlash from those who are exploiting the system. So unfortunately, James, this once again is just yet another symptom of the single root cause. And until we address this root cause, this is never going to go away. And again, it always comes back to, is the root cause, is it part of a deliberate agenda, or is it just simple bad control, bad management, incompetent governments? Well, take your pick, and I'll leave our audience to make up their own minds on that. And then just a quick note about the Canadian Constitution. That's quite an interesting one. The Indian Constitution, I'd refer our audience, if you have any interest in the Indian Constitution, go back about a year or so ago. I did a series of podcasts with Colonel Singh where we went through the Indian Constitution, actually line by line, and it was quite fascinating, actually, picking out how the Indian Constitution firstly was established and how it actually very cleverly embeds the caste system in India. Even though on the face of it, it looks like the caste system is banned, actually, if you read the Constitution in detail and you pick it apart, no, it totally embeds it. And of course, the Constitution has other things like it regards Sikhs as Hindus. Again, that's part of the reason why it was never signed by the Sikhs back in 1949, 1950, etc., etc. But it's interesting seeing the contrast now between the Canadian Constitution and the Indian Constitution. Both nations have constitutions, written constitutions, or freedom of rights, Bill of Rights, whatever you want to call it. And it's how each nation treats their constitution. And it's a compare and contrast situation. Both countries have the constitutions. Which country adheres to its constitution, which doesn't. I think our audience can guess which doesn't, because regularly, on a regular basis, India looks at its constitution, or the Indian government, and just ignores bits of it, or at least rewrites it. It goes. A classic example is the case of Kashmir, J&K, where J&K had a special reserve status under the Indian constitution. Well, Narendra Modi's government, the Hindutva forces, decided, you know what? No, we don't want that. So they ripped it up. They completely removed a whole clause from the Indian constitution, and it was backed up. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court rubber stamped it, saying, "Yeah, that's okay." So India picks and chooses which part of its constitution it adheres to suit its own case, and therefore it was constitutionally then legally allowed to just throw out J&K's special reserve status. I mean, again, talking about democratic credentials, it becomes laughable. But you wouldn't see that happening in Canada. Now, constitutions are rewritten, constitutions are tweaked here and there, but always under the scrutiny of law, under the scrutiny of impartial judges, and a society and a press that holds any government accountable to any changes to its constitution. That certainly would happen in Canada. It doesn't happen in India, unfortunately. So again, it's compare and contrast India to Canada. Again, it's very clear which country is the genuine democracy and which country just plays at it, which country has the sign outside saying we're a democracy, but you go through that door and you find something very different, James. So as I say, it's a very interesting compare and contrast, that one.
It is, and it's interesting now that Pierre Poilievre is back into the House of Commons and Parliament, because now we hear him talking, and it's a lot of parroting points from the MAGA playbook and, the Maple MAGA, as they're called. And yeah, he's talking about locking up people and, it's about the Constitution, making sure that we protect it as our solemn right here in Canada. So again, it shows the difference between different nations and what they expect of us as opposed to what we're willing to do.
Indeed, and it actually brings me conveniently on to my story. Actually, I'm going to stay with Canada, because we've been talking about comparing and contrasting the two democracies. And of course, India has been up to all sorts of no good in, I was going to say North America, across the world, clearly, with its transnational oppression. And recently, just a few days ago, actually, the new Indian High Commissioner to Canada, a guy called Dinesh Patnaik, appeared in his first interview on Canadian TV News. He was actually interviewed for about 10 or 15 minutes. It's quite an interesting interview. And I'm going to play parts of this interview because I want to pick apart what essentially was an absolute masterclass, I have to say, from a diplomat. This guy he's new in Canada. He was appointed to the High Commission in Canada only just it was at the end of August the 25th. He's had a long diplomatic career. So this guy is very very experienced, very knowledgeable, and he, as I say, this interview is an absolute masterclass in how to portray one's country when it's been up to no good. So let me play. I'll start off with this, and as I say, it was on CTV about a couple of days ago, and he sets the scene at the beginning of the interview, and this is a classic piece of diplomacy. I'll play the first section.
Canada and India, we share so much things in common. I mean, I can name you everything from democracy, freedom of press, rule of law, to being pluralistic, diverse countries with a whole lot of...
Sorry, apologies. There we go. Another technical issue. Let me just play that again. As you say, we're still coming to grips with this wretched new studio. But anyway, here we go.
Canada and India, we share so much things in common. I mean, I can name you everything from democracy, freedom of press, rule of law, to being pluralistic, diverse countries with a whole lot of open economy, open society. You name anything that you can talk. We're both the same kind of people. And you're the largest country by area as a democracy, and we're the largest country by population as a democracy.
So that is a classic piece of diplomacy. He's set the scene. This is the beginning of the interview. He's building bridges. He's saying, look, you and I, we're all the same. Canada, India, we are the same. We share so many democratic values. Now, again, I'd love to pick that apart. I think regular viewers of the show know full well our opinion of India's democracy. But there you see, he's winning over his audience. He's saying, look, I'm credible. I'm a decent guy. Listen to what I'm saying because we share the same values. So again, as I talk about a masterclass in diplomacy, this is a very typical diplomatic opening, just to build the bridges, to win over your audience to what follows. In other words, listen to me, what I'm saying must be true because we share the same values. Now let's look at the next step.
Right. The initial steps have been taken. The very fact that the High Commissioners are back, that the ministers have met, that the officials are meeting, that the structured program that we have for meetings over the next few years, it's all going to put things back to restore the relationship and progress much more beyond what has been happening in the past.
So what he's talking about here, of course, is now starting to frame the argument, saying, look, we've had some issues before, but don't worry, things are good now. And of course, he's referring there, we had the diplomatic spat. This is post Hardeep Singh Nijjar murder by India. He's quietly sort of brushing that away and say, look, now we've got a new regime in place. We've got Mark Carney in place. We've got a very different scenario. We're starting to rebuild our relationships. Let's not talk about the uncomfortable past. Let's talk about the future. And he's now starting to frame this discussion where Carney's predecessor was the problem, but Carney's a decent guy. We're building bridges with Carney. Now our consular officials are coming back. We're rebuilding diplomatic relations. Things are rosy back in the garden. So again, you start to see how he's starting to frame the argument that the problem was actually Trudeau. It was Carney's predecessor was the problem. So, but the interviewer now, the lady interviewer on CTV, she now starts to actually go back to the past and say, look, there have been these allegations. So she starts posing these very gently. I'll say it was a very gentle interview, but she starts posing these allegations to the commissioner. Here's his response.
Those allegations are preposterous and absurd. I mean, I don't have to go back into them because they are in the past now. What we needed is a discussion to be able to talk to each other and not make allegations in press without any substantial evidence, which was done by an individual which we talked about, which is fine. It's like I said, it's in the past. For us is to build the relationship back again. The security people are talking to each other. There is a dialogue going on between the RCMP and the NIA. There's both the NSAs, the National Security Advisors of both countries have met. We are in the process of building up the relationship again, which, like you said, one single man destroyed, or what my predecessor said.
I didn't say, yeah, just to be clear.
To be clear.
He said it, yeah.
But the point with it is we needed to build it back, build back trust.
So again, you can start to see how he's building this narrative. He's brushing once again that the past is the past. Let's brush it under the carpet. Let's move forward. This is all about moving forward. And he immediately dismisses what's gone before as, look, there was no evidence. He's building again this narrative. There is no evidence. So what are we talking about? There's no evidence about our misbehaviour. And once again, he's bringing back this narrative. Look, it's the problem was this. He keeps referring to this individual. He doesn't name him by name, Justin Trudeau. Once again, he's focusing all the bad stuff on Carney's predecessor, Justin Trudeau. He's saying, look, that individual was the problem, but let's not worry about it because we're moving forward. And as part of that moving forward, he said, look, there's good dialogue between the RCMP and the NIA and the NSA in India, the counterparts in India. Well, of course there's dialogue, but he's again reframing this narrative, saying, look, we're all talking to each other, we're all friends now, we're sharing intelligence. Again, it's all about the past. So he's actually focused all the negative attention on Justin Trudeau. The problem was Justin Trudeau. It wasn't India, it wasn't anything else, it wasn't Hardeep Singh Nijjar, it was just Justin Trudeau was the problem. But it's okay because we're moved on now. And we have this great relationship between the RCMP and the NIA and the NSA because they're talking. Well, of course they're talking. We know why. But again, you can start to see how he's now framing this whole new narrative. So let's move on. And he actually now develops this narrative into a very manipulative way for his audience. Listen to this.
Those allegations that they had made was without any substance. What we are talking about now are the different security scenarios that is happening in this country. Security scenarios where there is a group of people who are actually terrorizing, who are keeping the relationship under hostage. How do we deal with them? How do we do with the law and order situation? The Lawrence Bishnoi gang, which was put under proscription. We have already the Babar Khalsa and ISYF under proscription in this country. So how do we deal with the entire security situation? How do we deal with sovereignty issue? How do we deal with territorial integrity issues? How do we deal with criminal activities? All of these things are under discussion. And these things will make things, like Anita Anand said, people safe on the streets. And that's most important, because at the end of the day, people in Canada have to understand that they're safe. People in India have to understand that they're safe in Canada, and that's most important. I find it strange that a High Commissioner here has to be under protection. I am under protection. I should not be under protection in a country like this. If you think it's safe, why am I under protection?
So, again, very clever, very manipulative. India, as an Indian commissioner, he claims he's under protection. He's implying that Canada is not safe. Canada is supposed to be a safe country, is what he's saying. That you're supposed to be a safe country, but I'm not safe here. Why am I not safe? So he's bringing in this narrative that there is a group of people, in his words, who are terrorising this relationship. And he's, again, very clever with his words. He hasn't said they are terrorising through violence or anything. He said they are terrorising the relationship. But he's got that word terrorising in. Again, very clever introduction of the word terror, terrorism, terrorising. It's very subtle, it's very subliminal. But this guy, as I said, this is a masterclass in how to manipulate your audience and subliminally introduce these concepts that the problem are a certain group of people, clearly, who must be terrorists, because he's used this word terrorising the relationship. And he says, how do we deal with them? This law and order situation. In other words, he's now immediately saying, look, there is a law and order situation in Canada. Is that there is clearly a group of criminals who are targeting people like me. I am the victim here. I am a visitor in your country, and yet I am a victim. And again, you start to see this similar narrative we see right across the US as well, is that it's victims. Hindus are victims. Hindus are victims of these terrorists. Who are the terrorists? Well, of course, he's referring to the Khalistanis. He's basically, without saying specifically, but he's framing the whole narrative towards one target. It's the Sikh people, it's the Khalistanis are the problem. As he says, people need to be safe on the street, but they're not safe on the street because, well, remember he talks about the Bishnoi gang. He suddenly introduced the Bishnoi gang, but in the same breath as he mentions Baba Khalsa and ISYF, these two Sikh groups, which are actually now have been labelled as, or were labelled as terrorist groups in Canada. Now, Baba Khalsa was linked to the Air India attack, the Air India bombing, which, as we keep saying, was in all likelihood an Indian false flag. But again, once again, this is classic Indian narrative, and particularly through this masterclass in diplomatic language, he is using the Bishnoi gang in the same breath as these Sikh prescribed organisations. In other words, the Bishnoi gang must therefore be Sikh terrorists. Now, again, our audience will be spitting their tea out as they watch this. We know full well the Bishnoi gang is totally and utterly and publicly stated anti-Khalistan. The Bishnoi gang, we do know, is in all likelihood a proxy extension of the Indian state and Indian intelligence to target the Khalistan community. The Bishnoi gang have been killing and targeting and attacking violently Khalistani campaigners. They've made no secret of hating Khalistanis. And yet here we have the Indian High Commissioner now actually by implication saying, oh, Bishnoi gang, they're the same as these Sikh terrorists, and therefore the Bishnoi gang must be a bunch of Sikh terrorists. So again, you can start to see how he's pushing all these little pieces into one, moulding them into one completely fake narrative. And he doesn't say it specifically, he doesn't make the specific accusation, but he puts all the pieces into almost like a dotted painting that paints the overall picture. If you defocus and you put all the pieces together, you start to see this completely false picture. It's, again, as I say, it is a masterclass of language to frame a completely fake narrative. So then, now, the journalist then actually poses the specific allegations. She actually says, look, well, what about these allegations? You've actually been specifically accused of transnational repression. You've been specifically accused by Justin Trudeau of the murder of Hardeep Singh Jar. But it's not just the politicians, the RCMP themselves. In other words, our state law enforcement have actually accused India. So, basically, are you denying that? Here's his response.
No, the RCMP has made its allegations. Now we are waiting for any evidence to be given.
So still
but it's a bigger discussion between both countries because it's not a specific allegation which is important. What is important is the bigger discussion. Is Canada safe for Indians here? Is Canada safe from itself? Because Canada cannot look at this situation as an Indian problem. It's a Canadian problem. There are Canadians who are creating this problem. So do you look at it? Do you look at what is happening within Canada? Today, one of the restaurants which was attacked for the third time in Vancouver, shots were fired at the restaurant, which is owned by an Indian. Indians are feeling, South Asians and Indians are feeling unsafe here. Do we need to target that? Do we need to make sure that they feel safe? What is happening here? The High Commissioner of Canada and India doesn't need protection, but the High Commissioner of India and Canada needs protection.
And again, talking about spitting out your tea, I mean, I think I spit out my tea when I saw this bit. I mean, how he's framed it again, it's not an Indian problem, it's a Canadian problem. I mean, the brazen nerve to say this issue is a Canadian problem, and the Indians are now being targeted by violence. And he even brings up the Caps Cafe attack, saying, look, Indians are under attack. And yet, as we keep saying, and the evidence is blatantly obvious, is that Indian organised crime has been exported to Canada, so therefore, and it has become Canada's problem. But the root cause of the problem, is not Canada, it's India. It's organised crime exported from India. And that organised crime is attacking the Sikh community, but it's also attacking its own community. And once again, referring to the Caps Cafe, again, how he's very cleverly brought in cherry-picked all these bits of evidence, just saying that Indians are the victims and feel unsafe. It's unsafe to be an Indian in Canada. So he's wrapping up the Sikh community with the wider Hindu community, saying that all Indians are under attack here. All Indians are the subject of these crimes, of organised crimes. Well, they may be to some extent, but the real issue, of course, is it's the Sikh community that are under attack. But again, you can start to see how he's very, very cleverly manipulated the narrative, how he's cherry-picked all the little bits of facts and remolded them, repackaged them together into a completely false narrative. And then finally, he wraps up with and again, he's specifically asked, look, you're saying that it's a Canadian problem, and he's saying Indians are being targeted, but how can you be sure then that the Sikh community won't be targeted? Now that you're back here, now that relations are supposedly normalised, how can you guarantee that the Sikh community won't be under attack? Here's his response.
They never were. I find it very strange that allegations have become evidence. It never works like that. Anybody can.
Well, they haven't. To be fair, you're right. They haven't been proven in court, but. As Canadians, when our national police force conveys something,
when somebody
you're put
makes
on
a
alert.
mistake in saying something, it's up to the RCMP to make things right. I cannot guarantee you something which I have not done. I cannot say they will be safe because I never targeted them.
But you can be explicit. There will be no sort of extraterritorial action against anything.
We never do. Extraterritorial action by India is never done. When is the last time you heard of an extraterritorial action by India?
Well, the one I'm most familiar with is the one the RCMP alleges here.
Yes, but that's an allegation. Exactly what I'm saying.
I understand.
It's the same thing when we say that we have a problem with certain sections. It's an allegation, but if we give evidence, then it becomes actionable. So please, let's talk about it the same way.
So again, you can see his narrative here. Where's the evidence? This again, we've had this regularly from India. Where is the evidence? Show me the evidence of any transnational repression. Show me the evidence where India basically has misbehaved. Well, plausible deniability. This is where it all comes back to the way that India has dealt with transnational repression. It's used its proxy killers, its proxy criminals like the Bishnoi gang, like various other criminals around the world. We do know that Khalistani campaigners have been murdered in Pakistan, in Canada, probably here in the UK, and almost in the US with Gurpatwant Singh Pannoon. And yet he's fallen back on the very simple defence. Well, where's the evidence? Yeah, they're all allegations. RCMP have made these allegations. It's very easy to make allegations, but in other words, where's your proof? And well, again, I'll leave it at that. But again, it's when I say talking about spitting out your tea. This, as I started this discussion, this is an absolute masterclass in diplomatic language. This guy is very, very good at what he does. It's very obvious. I mean, the evidence is laying out. The evidence has appeared right across the United States, across Canada, across here in the UK, across Europe. We do know what India are up to. The evidence is blatant for all to see. It's sitting on top of a building in neon lights, 15 feet high, saying here's the evidence. But he always has that fallback option. Well, where's the proof? You know. So as I say, and interestingly, just as a side note, he was, as I say, he's a career diplomat. He was the Deputy High Commissioner of India in London from 2016 to 2018. That was at the time when, for example, we had the British government targeting certain members of our Khalistan community, our Khalistan campaigning community here in the UK. So he knows full well what goes on behind the scenes. We do know that the Indian consular infrastructure is used by RAW to undertake its operations globally. It uses it as its intelligence doorway into the various countries to undertake its operations. Avtar Singh Kandar murdered, probably by India. So this guy knows full well what's going on. As I say, he's a high-ranking, high-profile Indian diplomat. So he knows full well what's going on beneath the surface, and yet he can sit there and come across as a perfectly reasonable guy, actually extolling the virtues, firstly, of India, secondly, of this India-Canada relationship. It's a Canadian problem, but hey, don't worry, we're working towards it. We're helping you solve this. And Mark Carney, of course, and again, we have a real problem of weak leadership in the West now. And I'll put Trump as one exception to that. Like him or lump him or loathe him, Trump is a leader. And if he doesn't like something, he calls it out. Carney, Starmer, Macron in France, Albanese, etc. All these guys, on the whole, are weak leaders. Is that Modi and the Hindutva forces are laughing. They've got away with it. They are getting away with this. Absolutely laughing all the way back to Delhi, saying, look, they're welcoming us with open arms. They want to talk about trade. They don't care the fact that we've been murdering these Khalistanis all around the world. We're getting away with it. And now we can brush it under the carpet. They're clearly quite happy to brush it under the carpet. Our human rights abuses, who cares? Clearly the West doesn't. So anyway, and just to wrap this segment up, there has been, of course, unsurprisingly, lots of reaction to this. And I'm going to play you one piece of reaction which always makes me chuckle. Here you go.
India's High Commissioner, the new face of Hindutva terror in Canada, Dinesh Patnaik, has just mocked 40 million Canadians by stating Carney government has no evidence of Modi government's hand in the assassination of Shahid Nijar. He also stated, this is a Canadian problem. Dinesh Patnaik, yes, it is a Canadian problem because they have provided you protection instead of putting you in prison. Yes, it is a Canadian problem because pro-Khalistan Sikhs like me are not using bullets but using ballots. Yes, it is a Canadian problem. But let me tell you something, Dinesh Patnaik, violence begets violence. On 31st October, there will be a reminder, Dinesh Patnaik, from east to west in Vancouver. We are going to use your terror houses, Indian consulates, the hub where you plot assassinations of pro-Khalistan Sikhs. This is the symbol of India's Hindutva terror, and we are going to burn this symbol to the ground. Dinesh Patnaik, on 31st October, we are seizing your terror houses. At this time, we are using ballot, but remember, violence begets violence. Khalistan Zindabad! Khalistan Zindabad!
So I think, unsurprising a reaction from Gurtan Singh Panoon, but I think it's interesting, his comment there, violence begets violence. He obviously, he's been following his own narrative, it's ballots, not bullets. And yet, he's twice in this video, and that's a foreshortened version of that video, but he does make this statement, violence begets violence. I don't know what that means. I don't know how to interpret that. I do hope it means that there is going to be no violence on behalf of the Khalistan side, because, of course, the Khalistan movement is entirely peaceful and democratic. But it's quite an interesting warning from Gurtan Singh Panoon there, James.
Absolutely, and that statement I found kind of concerning. That it just seems like he's usually very careful about not crossing certain lines, and the way that he positions his words when he speaks them, he's usually very articulate in that process. And that statement's just, left me wondering as well. But at the end of the day, I do trust that that it will be peaceful, and they will, again, some people see burning the flag as violence. So that could be, what he's referring to as well. Just a couple of quick things, because we're running out of time, Angus, that I wanted to point there is, first of all, his denial that there is any evidence and that there's absolutely nothing to see there. And yet he openly admits that the NIA, the NSA, the RCMP, they're all meeting about these things. But what the heck are they meeting for so long, for months, over a year? I mean, what are they meeting about if there's no evidence? What about the indictment in the United States that also crossed over to the Niger assassination? And the evidence is there. The videos are there. There's so much evidence. And believe me, we haven't even seen a fraction of the evidence that the police and the security agencies and everybody has. So again, as for if I did believe in violence, which I don't, but if I did, I'd love to smack that smirk off his face, because you look at his body language and you look at his smirk and his smile when he's talking about Hardeep Singh Nijjar and the fact that India had nothing to do with any violence and that it's a Canadian problem, but there's the smirk on his face like he's getting away with something and that he knows more than he's saying. I mean, that just gets in my craw, Angus. It just made me sick that he obviously knows exactly what's going on. He also, I don't believe, is going to help in terms of quelling the threat of violence and the Bishnoi gang here in Canada. And in closing on that, I'll just say that, again, if he was serious about the violence being reduced here in Canada and the crime, all he has to do is switch Bishnoi to another prison where he doesn't have the corrupt guards that are giving him cell phones and allowing him to conduct business as usual. He is very much involved in running his criminal empire around the globe from that damn jail cell. Move him to another facility that's secure, if there is such a thing as a non-corrupt facility in the country, but move them. That would take care of part of the problem, both in India and here in Canada. And yes, I don't say that it's all, India's fault, because we've got a lot of criminality that's going on in Canada that has nothing to do with the Indian diaspora, nothing to do with the Sikh community, nothing to do with the Hindus, but it is there. And yes, we do have Canadian problems when it comes to crime. That is something that our politicians are actively at this time currently looking at and trying to reduce and bringing in harsher penalties. And that includes against members of the Bishnoi gang. So, they're not being forgotten, Angus.
Indeed, absolutely. As I say, it was the guy is very, very good at his job. Even in the flying in the face of evidence and the facts, he manages still to somehow almost win over his audience and sound totally credible in spouting a completely fake narrative. So, anyway, let's move on. As we're now running out of time, we must rush through our comments.
I just add one quick thing there, Angus. If you talk about the caste system and the way they treat women. At one point, I'm sure I heard him call the lady that was interviewing him, sir. I don't know if you caught that. I'm sure I caught that, but again,
maybe.
Just I thought I'd point it out. It's a mentality, right?
Indeed, yeah. I'll have to check back through that interview. Anyway, we must rush through our comments now. And TC and KJB Singh have actually made very similar comments and very pertinent to what we've just been talking about. The Caps Cafe attack is basically they're saying, it's an amalgam of comments, basically saying, look, it was probably a false flag. And it's designed, the whole thing was an operation clearly designed to make, again, victims of the Hindus, and there's even this accusation that potentially it was a deliberately false flag to show that Hindus are the victims, and it was likely Khalistani campaigners even who were attacking these things. So again, you can see how the narrative is being framed using all these bits of evidence, and down on the ground is it clearly there are proxy criminals acting on behalf of the Indian government, James.
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's something that we've just talked about quite in depth here. So yeah, spot on.
And next load from Narinderjit Singh Saini. We've brought very concerning and horrible aspects of 509. This is the bill that was vetoed by Governor Newsom. And M. Verdi and Bobby Singh also. Had a lot of comments really concerned about this bill being vetoed. And there is generally, I think, the consensus of comments was really an appeal. What can we do about this? Clearly, there was something going deeply wrong in US political policy if it can be so influenced. And M. Verdi goes to the extent of saying he's a coward and is corrupt. Of course, I mean, it does raise the question of corruptions. We need to think again. And Bobby Singh says, can we reintroduce it? Yes, I think the answer to that is yes in theory, but there's no point because it'll just get vetoed again. It's, again, the only way, actually, ultimately, we've got to get rid of Governor Newsom. The ballot box is the only way to replace him with somebody else who won't veto such a bill, James.
Absolutely. And again, it's, running out of time, but that's something that we can get into in other conversations as we have in great length in many of them. So again, yeah, it's good to see that we're on the same page as a lot of our audience here. So that's good.
And Mohandan comes back with a comment. Why are Hindus hated? And again, we don't hate this show, and Satellite TV do not hate Hindus. We've made it very clear that we see Hindus as fellow victims. They are just as much victims of Hindutva. The problem here are the Brahmins. It's the Brahmanical ruling elite. It's the Hindutva RSS forces of India that are the real enemy of all of us, including Hindus. Unfortunately, it is the likes of Shah and Modi and many of their predecessors who are responsible. In this case, as you rightly point out, the murder of thousands of Muslim men, women and children in Gujarat. The butcher of Gujarat was indeed Narendra Modi. Narendra Modi was banned from visiting the United States by the Clinton administration because of his involvement in the murder. I think it was a couple of thousand Muslims during various riots. I think it was after a mosque was replaced by a mandir, or I forget the specific details. But basically, both men have blood on their hands, James.
Absolutely. And again, this is one comment that I did respond to directly and explain that it's not all Hindus. People do not hate Hindus as a whole. It's the extremists, it's the Hindutva, it's the BJP government and how they administer and regulate the country. So again, it's looking back at the history as well. And there is a lot of animosity and anger, but it's not against all Hindus.
Indeed. And Critics Corner returns once again with Killer 3, who's becoming a bit of a regular in Critics Corner. This is the second day in a row. So thank you, Killer, for your comment.
Nice.
And you're actually quite dismissive of Hindus for human rights. They look, basically, they're irrelevant. And so they're not taken seriously. Well, of course they're not taken seriously by the Indian government because they're trying to hold the Indian government to account. Now, what you also say is that Western governments don't take them seriously. I think they do. Western governments do listen to them, and this is really what it's all about. And your second part of your comment really, actually, I agree with, is that Western governments are more interested in trade and business relationships. And this is to the bad reputation of Western governments. This is the terrible record of Western governments that we say we're democracies, and yet we are prepared to turn a blind eye. And people like you, Killer, actually, you're jumping on this saying, look at the West, they're laughing at this. Yeah, I agree with you, sadly. I think this is very sad. This is a very sad comment because I think I agree with parts of it.
Absolutely. And it's great that he can bring this comment, he or she. And we can look at both sides of it, Angus. And absolutely, yes, the India government does is upset with them because they are holding them to account. At the same time, the international community is laughing and, they do take the organization seriously. And you can see that through certain legislation or changes in legislation or even the blocking thereof while advancing other justifications or causes that go against certain groups as well.
Again, root causes, weak leadership. Weak leadership breeds problems. Yeah. We have problems now in the democratic West because of weak leadership. Plain and simple. Anyway, final set of comments, and I did chuckle at this one. Arsh Mengi, and I don't know if this was an autocorrect issue, and if it is, it's quite a concerning one. And I'm not even going to read it out, but it did make me laugh on this one, James.
Do you know, it's funny. I get a lot of those comments when I report on the ostrich farm in BC because they have the maple megas and that, and they hate me. But so I get worse than that every day. So I just laugh.
Say thank you, Arsh Mengi. Again, I don't know if that should have appeared in Critics Corner or it was actually an autocorrect, but thank you anyway for the comment. It did make us chuckle. SEC Tin says, true journalism, that's what we try to be. And my Punjabi again is the voice of truth, says that you love to hear the truth from your trustworthy channel. Thank you for your support. We do try our best to obviously deliver the truth. We do try to corroborate everything that we talk about. And like as you rightly said, India killed millions of innocent Sikhs since 1947. but they've also killed innocent Muslims in Gujarat, but Muslims are quiet. Yeah, why aren't the Muslims actually as active campaigning as the Sikh community? It's always a Sikh community in the subcontinent who's always taken the vanguard against injustice and oppression. It's always a Sikh community that have stood up to the Brahmanical rulers of India. That is why the Sikh community are under such siege, under attack from the Brahmins. They are. This is why so many Sikhs have been killed and murdered since 1947 because of this very reason, James.
Absolutely. And that's the sad part of the reality is, all of the blood that's been shed. And needlessly, really, had the Sikhs been given what they were promised, both by India or before that, even when they were looking at the partition of India to start with, when the British were handing it over. If they would have just made that happen, I bet you that there would be just minuscule amount of tension between India and Pakistan because of what we talk about all the time with that buffer zone, Angus.
Indeed. And the final word of the show goes to Gurbaj Singh, who gets the final sign-off with Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ka Fateh, Khalistan Zindabad, James, as always.
As always, makes us smile as we finish up the show, Angus.
Indeed. So that is it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Do keep those comments coming in. Thank you for all of you who have commented. We've had some great comments as always. But do keep them coming. Do let us know things that you'd like us to talk about or any interesting snippets that you want to bring to our attention. Don't forget you can message us directly at message@satlugetv.com and you can email us directly through that email address. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. It is a goodbye from me. It is a goodbye from James.
Stay safe, everyone.
You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.